The bull rider Eli Torres was dead. His body lay motionless in the heart of Texas Fair and Rodeo Arena, 1,500 pounds of pure fury, named red smoke, standing triumphant over his crushed form. Blood pooled beneath his head where it had struck the packed dirt, and his chest, caved in from the bull's devastating hoof, no longer moved with the rhythm of life. No pulse. No pulse. Dr. Sarah Martinez screamed into her radio as she dropped to her knees beside the 22-year-old's lifeless body. Her hands, steady through 15 years of emergency medicine, trembled as she pressed her fingers against his neck, feeling nothing but the terrible silence where a heartbeat should be. The crowd of 8,000 people sat in stunned horror, their cheers dying in their throats as they watched the medical team swarm around a young cowboy who had been alive and laughing just moments before. Red Smoke, his job complete, snorted and pawed at the arena dirt, completely indifferent to the human tragedy unfolding beside him. "Get me the AED now," Dr. Martinez shouted, ripping open Eli's blood-soaked western shirt to expose the massive bruise already spreading across his ribs like spilled ink. His skin was turning blue, the color of death creeping across his face with terrifying speed. In the grandstand, Maria Torres watched her youngest son die. The woman who had raised 3 boys alone after losing her husband to a construction accident 8 years ago now faced every parent's worst nightmare, watching helplessly as her baby's life slipped away in front of thousands of strangers. "Mijo, no," she whispered, her voice lost in the chaos of the arena. "Please God, not my boy." The defibrillator charged with its distinctive electronic whine that cut through the eerie silence that had fallen over the fairgrounds. Dr. Martinez positioned the paddles on Eli's chest, his torn shirt revealing the full extent of the damage. Ribs clearly broken, sternum likely fractured, internal bleeding that was filling his abdomen with blood. "Clear." Eli's body convulsed as 200 joules of electricity coursed through his heart, trying to shock the muscle back to life. The monitor remained flat, a green line of death that refused to show even the smallest blip of hope. Again, charging to 300. The second shock hit him harder, his body arching off the ground as if he were being lifted by invisible hands. Still nothing. Jake Henderson, a veteran bull rider who had been thrown by Red Smoke twice himself, pushed through the crowd of cowboys gathered around the arena fence. He had seen plenty of wrecks in his 15 years of professional rodeo, but nothing like this. Cowboys were tough. They got back up, dusted themselves off, and climbed on the next bull. They didn't die in the arena dirt while their mothers watched from the stands. "Come on, kid," he muttered, gripping the fence so hard his knuckles went white. "You can't let that son of a bitch win." Dr. Martinez prepared for a third shock, knowing that if this one didn't work, she would have to make the call that every medical professional dreaded. She looked up at the scoreboard clock. Eli had been down for 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Even if they got him back now, the lack of oxygen to his brain might have caused irreversible damage. "Come on, Eli," she whispered, positioning the paddles one more time. "Don't you dare give up on me." The third shock sent electricity racing through his damaged heart, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, nothing happened. The monitor remained flat, the crowd held its collective breath, and Maria Torres prepared to bury another man she loved. Then, like a miracle born from desperation and skill, a weak blip appeared on the monitor. Then another. Eli's chest rose slightly as his lungs remembered their purpose, and his heart began the slow, uncertain journey back to life. "We got him," Dr. Martinez yelled, her voice cracking with relief and exhaustion. "Weak and irregular, but we got him back." The crowd exploded in cheers that shook the grandstand, but the celebration was premature. Eli Torres might have a heartbeat, but he was still fighting for his life. As paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher, his blood pressure was dangerously low, his breathing shallow and labored. The ride to Baylor Scott and White Medical Center would be a race against time. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, head of cardiac surgery, was already scrubbing in when the ambulance screamed into the emergency bay. Word had spread quickly through the hospital's cardiac unit about the young bull rider, who had suffered traumatic arrest after being trampled by a 1,500-pound bull. These cases were rare but often fatal. The combination of blunt force trauma and cardiac arrest created a perfect storm of medical complications that even experienced trauma teams struggled to handle. "What do we have?" Dr. Walsh asked as the paramedics burst through the trauma bay doors. 22-year-old male professional bull rider took a direct hoof to the chest, went into traumatic arrest in the arena. Down for approximately 4.5 minutes before we got him back. Multiple rib fractures, possible internal bleeding, blood pressure 70/40 and unstable. Eli's body was connected to more machines than Maria Torres had ever seen. Monitors beeped and flashed, displaying numbers and waveforms that meant nothing to her, but everything to the medical team working frantically around her son. His face was swollen and bruised, barely recognizable as the handsome young man who had kissed her goodbye that morning. "Mrs. Torres," Dr. Walsh approached her in the family waiting room after what felt like hours of surgery. "Your son is alive, but his condition is critical. The impact damaged his heart muscle significantly, and we had to repair internal bleeding in his abdomen. The next 48 hours will determine whether he survives this." Maria Torres nodded, unable to trust her voice. She had already lost her husband to a job that was supposed to provide for their family. Now she faced losing the youngest of her 3 sons to a sport that she had never understood, never supported, and had always feared would end exactly like this. "Will he?" She started, then stopped, unable to voice the question that terrified her most. "Will he be able to ride again?" Dr. Walsh finished gently. "Mrs. Torres, right now I'm concerned with whether he'll be able to walk again. The trauma to his heart was severe. Even if he recovers fully, his cardiac function may never be the same." In the intensive care unit, Eli Torres lay unconscious, his body sustained by machines that breathed for him and monitored every heartbeat. The young man who had climbed on Red Smoke's back with dreams of glory and an 8-second ride had been reduced to a collection of tubes, wires, and medical data points. But somewhere in the darkness of his medically induced coma, Eli Torres was dreaming. He was back on Red Smoke, but this time everything was different. This time he could feel the bull's power beneath him, could anticipate every twist and turn. In his dreams, he made the 8-second buzzer and raised his hat to a cheering crowd while his mother smiled from the stands. Dreams, however, don't heal broken ribs or restart damaged hearts. When Eli Torres woke up, if he woke up, he would face a reality more challenging than any bull he had ever ridden. The boy who had died in the Rodeo, Texas arena would have to learn how to live again. Red Smoke, meanwhile, had been loaded into his trailer for the trip back to Jim Morrison's ranch, completely unaware of the young man whose life he had changed forever. The bull had done exactly what 15 years of breeding and training had designed him to do. He was not evil or malicious. He was simply very, very good at his job. As the sun rose over Waco, Texas, the Rodeo Texas Fair and Rodeo continued its run, but the magic was gone. The other bull riders went through their routines with mechanical precision, but everyone's thoughts were on the young cowboy fighting for his life in the ICU 20 miles away. Jake Henderson sat in his hotel room, staring at his own entry forms for the next rodeo. For the first time in his career, he questioned whether 8 seconds was worth a lifetime. He had seen Eli Torres ride in smaller rodeos over the past 2 years, had watched him develop from a promising amateur into someone with the potential to make it to the Professional Bull Riders Tour. Now that potential lay shattered in a hospital bed, and Jake Henderson wondered if any of them really understood the price they were willing to pay for their addiction to danger. The story spread across social media like wildfire. Videos of the accident, filmed by spectators, were shared thousands of times within hours. The hashtag #PrayForEli began trending across multiple platforms as the rodeo community rallied around one of their own. But for every message of support, there was another questioning the sanity of a sport that could produce such devastating injuries. Professional bull riders faced death every time they climbed over the rails of a bucking chute. Most accepted that risk as part of the job, the price of admission to a brotherhood that valued courage above common sense. But seeing one of their own actually die and be brought back to life forced everyone to confront the reality that their sport was quite literally a matter of life and death. Dr. Walsh checked on Eli every hour throughout that first night, monitoring his vital signs for any indication that his body was giving up the fight. His heart rate remained weak but steady, his blood pressure had stabilized with the help of medications, and the internal bleeding appeared to have stopped. But the real test would come when he woke up, if he woke up. The human brain can survive without oxygen for approximately 4 to 6 minutes before permanent damage occurs. Eli had been down for 4.5 minutes, putting him right at the edge of that critical threshold. If essa historia já mexicam você, esse inscreva no canal e deixo seu like para neo perda nenhuma de nossas historias. As dawn broke over the Texas countryside, Red Smoke stood in his pasture, grazing peacefully in the morning light. The bull had no memory of the young man he had nearly killed, no awareness of the family he had devastated, No comprehension of the questions he had forced an entire sport to confront. He was simply a bull, doing what bulls do, waiting for the next challenger foolish enough to climb on his back. In 3 months, the Rodeo Texas Fair and Rodeo would return, and Red Smoke would be ready to do his job again. Whether Eli Torres would be ready to do his was a question that only time, and a damaged heart struggling to heal itself, could answer. The first sensation that penetrated Eli Torres's consciousness wasn't pain. It was the sound of his own heart beating. Not the natural unconscious rhythm he had taken for granted for 22 years, but an amplified, mechanical sound that seemed to echo through his skull like thunder. Beep, beep, beep. Each heartbeat announced to the world that he was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to surrender to the bull that had tried to kill him. His eyes opened to harsh fluorescent lighting that felt like needles piercing his brain. The intensive care unit at Baylor Scott and White Medical Center was a sterile maze of machines, tubes, and monitors that surrounded his bed like electronic guardians. A ventilator breathed for him through a tube down his throat, making speech impossible, but his mind was clear enough to understand that he was lucky to be breathing at all. Mijo! His mother's voice came from somewhere to his right, thick with exhaustion and relief. Maria Torres had not left the hospital in 5 days, surviving on vending machine coffee and the prayers of friends who brought her food. She was too worried to eat. You're awake. Gracias a Dios, you're awake. Eli tried to speak, but found his voice trapped behind the breathing tube. Panic flashed across his eyes as he struggled against the ventilator, his body instinctively fighting against the machine that was keeping him alive. Dr. Jennifer Walsh appeared beside his bed, her calm presence immediately cutting through his distress. Easy, Eli. You've been unconscious for 5 days. You have a breathing tube to help your lungs while your body heals. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to squeeze my hand for yes. Can you do that? Eli's hand found hers and squeezed weakly, the simple gesture requiring more effort than he expected. Good. Do you remember what happened to you? Another squeeze, though the memories were fragmented and surreal. He remembered climbing onto Red Smoke's back, remembered the bull exploding out of the chute with devastating power, remembered the sensation of losing his grip and falling toward the arena dirt. After that, everything was darkness. You were hurt very badly, Dr. Walsh continued, her voice gentle but direct. Red Smoke caught you in the chest with his hind hoof. You went into cardiac arrest in the arena. Your heart stopped beating for 4.5 minutes, but the paramedics got you back. You've been in intensive care since then. 4.5 minutes. The number hit Eli like another kick from Red Smoke. 4.5 minutes of death, of his mother watching helplessly as her youngest son lay motionless in arena dirt. 4.5 minutes closer to eternity than most people would ever come. Maria Torres pulled her chair closer to his bed, her weathered hands grasping his with desperate relief. She looked like she had aged a decade in 5 days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were the same ones she had worn to the rodeo, and her eyes were red from tears and sleepless nights. Everyone's been praying for you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Your brothers drove down from Houston and Dallas. Jake Henderson has been by every day. The whole rodeo community is pulling for you. Even people who don't know you are sending messages of support. She showed him her phone, the screen displaying hundreds of social media posts from around the country. Cowboys, fans, and complete strangers sharing his story and asking for prayers. The hashtag #FightLikeEli was trending across multiple platforms, and videos of his accident had been viewed millions of times. But more importantly, videos of him being resuscitated had given hope to families dealing with their own medical emergencies. His story had become bigger than bull riding. It had become a symbol of survival against impossible odds. Dr. Walsh checked his monitors and made notes on his chart. Your heart rhythm has stabilized, and the internal bleeding has stopped completely. We're going to try removing the breathing tube tomorrow if you continue to improve. But Eli, I need you to understand something. What happened to you was catastrophic. The damage to your heart muscle was significant, and we won't know the full extent of the impact on your cardiac function for several weeks. Eli squeezed her hand, wanting to know more, but unable to ask the questions burning in his mind. Would he be able to compete again? Would he ever feel normal? Had Red Smoke ended not just his career, but his life as he had known it? We'll have plenty of time to discuss your recovery once you can speak, Dr. Walsh said, reading the concern in his eyes. Right now, I want you to focus on one thing: you're alive. 5 days ago, that wasn't a certainty. Jake Henderson knocked softly on the door frame before entering, his cowboy boots squeaking against the polished hospital floor. The veteran bull rider looked uncomfortable in the sterile medical environment, but his presence brought a piece of the world Eli was desperate to return to. "Hey, kid," Jake said, his usually confident voice rough with emotion. "Gave us all quite a scare." "Hell, you gave yourself quite a scare." Jake had been in the arena when Eli went down, had watched the medical team work frantically to bring him back to life. The image of that young cowboy lying motionless in the dirt while his heart monitor showed a flat line would haunt Jake for the rest of his career. "I brought you something," Jake continued, pulling a worn leather journal from his jacket. "This belonged to Lane Frost. His widow gave it to me when I was about your age, said it might help me understand what we do out there and why we do it. I think you need to read it more than I do right now." Lane Frost had been one of bull riding's greatest champions before a bull named Taking Care of Business killed him in 1989. His story was legend in the rodeo world, a reminder that every ride could be your last, but also that some dreams were worth the risk of everything. Eli's eyes filled with tears, though whether from gratitude, medication, or the overwhelming weight of what he had survived, no one could say. Jake squeezed his shoulder gently. "You're going to have some big decisions to make when you get out of here," he said. "But right now, just focus on healing. The bulls will still be there when you're ready, whatever you decide that means." After Jake left, Maria Torres settled back into the chair that had become her second home. The nurses had tried repeatedly to convince her to go home, to shower and change clothes, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her son's body lying motionless in the arena dirt. "You know, your father would be proud of you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the beeping of the monitors. "Not because you rode that bull, but because you fought to come back. He always said the Torres men were too stubborn to die easy." Miguel Torres had been killed in a construction accident when Eli was 14, falling 40 feet from a high-rise building when a cable snapped. The family had struggled financially after his death, but Maria had worked 2 jobs to keep her sons in school and out of trouble. She had hoped that education might break the cycle of dangerous jobs that seemed to claim Torres men, but her youngest son had been drawn to rodeo like his father before him. The breathing tube was removed the following morning, and Eli's first words were barely a whisper. "Did I make 8?" Dr. Walsh, who was present for the procedure, couldn't help but smile despite the seriousness of his condition. "No, son. You made about 4 seconds before red smoke introduced you to the arena dirt." Eli's throat was raw from the tube, but he managed a weak laugh. 4 seconds. That's not even halfway. 4 seconds was enough to nearly kill you," Maria Torres said sharply, her fear manifesting as anger. "Maybe it's time to think about doing something else with your life." But even as she spoke the words, Maria Torres knew her son well enough to recognize the look in his eyes. It was the same expression his father had worn when he talked about taking dangerous construction jobs for better pay, the same stubborn determination that had gotten Miguel Torres killed and now threatened to take her youngest son as well. "Let's not worry about the future right now," Dr. Walsh interjected diplomatically. "You need to focus on healing. Your heart muscle sustained significant damage, and it's going to take months for it to repair itself. We'll need to do extensive testing before we can even discuss your activity level." Over the next several days, Eli's room became a pilgrimage site for the rodeo community. Cowboys who had heard about his accident drove from across Texas to pay their respects to a young man who had reminded them all of the ultimate price their sport could demand. Stock contractors, announcers, barrel racers, and bullfighters all stopped by to check on the cowboy who had died and come back to life. The media attention was intense. ESPN wanted to film a documentary about his accident and recovery. Sports Illustrated planned a feature story. The Professional Bull Riders Association offered him a consultant position, helping to improve rider safety protocols. But for Eli, lying in that hospital bed surrounded by flowers and get-well cards, only one thing mattered: the conversation he needed to have with Jim Morrison, the owner of Red Smoke. Morrison arrived on Eli's 6th day in the hospital, hat in hand and looking every bit as uncomfortable as Jake Henderson had. The weathered rancher had been breeding bucking bulls for over 30 years, and Red Smoke was the culmination of his life's work. A bull so athletically gifted and mentally tough that he had become legendary in professional rodeo circles. "Son, I want you to know that Red Smoke didn't mean nothing personal by what he did to you," Morrison said, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "That bull's just doing what God and genetics made him to do. He's bucked off over 200 riders in his career, and you're the first one that got hurt this bad. Eli studied the old rancher, seeing the guilt and responsibility weighing heavily on his shoulders. In the world of professional bull riding, injuries were an accepted part of the business, but deaths were rare enough to shake everyone involved. "Mr. Morrison," Eli said, his voice still weak but growing stronger each day, "I don't hold Red Smoke responsible for what happened to me. I climbed on his back knowing the risks. That bull was just better than I was that night." Morrison's eyes widened in surprise at the young man's response. Most riders who suffered serious injuries harbored resentment toward the bulls that hurt them, and their families often blamed the stock contractors for raising dangerous animals. "I appreciate you saying that, son. But I want you to know that if you decide you want to try Red Smoke again someday, I'll make sure it happens. That bull owes you a fair shot." "I'd like that," Eli said quietly, and Maria Torres felt her heart skip a beat. The conversation she had been dreading for days was about to begin, and she wasn't sure she was ready to hear her son's decision about his future. As Morrison left the room, Maria Torres pulled her chair closer to Eli's bed. "Mijo, you can't be serious about getting back on bulls. Look what happened to you. You died in that arena. Your heart stopped beating." Eli looked at his mother, seeing the fear and pain in her eyes that had been there since the night of his accident. He understood her terror, shared it to some extent, but he also knew that fear couldn't be allowed to make life's most important decisions. "Mama, I know what happened to me was terrible for you to watch. But I can't spend the rest of my life being afraid of what might happen. 4.5 minutes of death doesn't scare me as much as 40 years of wondering what if." Dr. Walsh entered the room before Maria Torres could respond, carrying a folder full of test results and treatment plans that would determine Eli's immediate future. "Eli, we need to talk about your cardiac function and what the next few months are going to look like," she said, settling into a chair beside his bed. "The damage to your heart muscle was extensive, but your body is already beginning the healing process. However, you need to understand that you'll never have the same cardiac capacity you had before the accident." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that your heart can only pump about 60% of the blood volume it could before Red Smoke kicked you in the chest. For normal daily activities, you'll probably never notice the difference. But for extreme physical exertion like professional bull riding." She let the implications hang in the air, giving Eli time to process what she was telling him. A damaged heart might be able to sustain normal life, but 8 seconds on the back of a 1,500-pound bull was far from normal. "Dr. Walsh, I need you to be completely honest with me. If I wanted to compete again, what would that look like?" The question hung in the room like smoke from a branding iron. Maria Torres held her breath, knowing that her son's entire future hinged on the doctor's next words. "Medically, I cannot recommend that you return to professional bull riding," Dr. Walsh said carefully. "The risk of another cardiac event is significant. If your heart stops again, especially in a remote arena without immediate medical care, you might not be lucky enough to have paramedics get you back a second time." But something in her tone suggested there might be more to the conversation. Eli pressed further. "But if I was absolutely determined to compete anyway, what would you need to see?" Dr. Walsh sighed, recognizing the stubborn determination that had kept Eli alive when his heart stopped beating. She had worked with elite athletes before, had seen the drive that pushed them to compete despite injury and risk. "If you were absolutely determined to ignore my medical advice, I would need several things. First, you would need to pass a comprehensive cardiac stress test that simulates the physical demands of bull riding. Second, you would need to have a cardiologist present at every event. Third, you would need to wear a heart monitor during competition so we could track your cardiac function in real time. Can you arrange those things?" "Eli, I'm not going to help you get yourself killed. Dr. Walsh, I'm going to compete with or without your help. The question is whether you want to help me do it as safely as possible." The words hung in the air between them, a challenge that forced the cardiologist to confront her own professional responsibilities. She could refuse to help and watch Eli compete without medical oversight, or she could work with him to minimize the risks as much as possible. "Give me some time to think about it," she said finally. "But first, you need to focus on basic recovery. You can't even walk to the bathroom without assistance right now." As Dr. Walsh left the room, Maria Torres turned to her son with tears in her eyes. "Eli, please don't do this to me again. I can't watch you die twice." But looking into his eyes, she already knew his decision had been made. Her youngest son was going back to the bulls, back to the arena, back to the 8-second rides that defined who he was. The only question was whether his damaged heart would be strong enough to survive the return. 3 months after leaving the hospital, Eli Torres stood at the edge of the practice arena behind Jake Henderson's ranch in Bandera, Texas, watching a young bull named Tornado throw rider after rider into the dirt with mechanical precision. His chest still ached when he moved wrong, and the scar from his cardiac surgery stretched across his sternum like a roadmap of survival. But for the first time since red smoke had nearly killed him, he felt ready to climb back on a bull. The rehabilitation process had been the most difficult challenge of his life. Every morning began with cardiac medications that regulated his damaged heart, followed by physical therapy sessions designed to rebuild his cardiovascular capacity, one heartbeat at a time. Dr. Patricia Chun, the sports medicine specialist Dr. Walsh had referred him to, had designed a training program unlike anything Eli had ever experienced. "Your heart is like a car engine that's been rebuilt," Dr. Chun had explained during their first session. "It might not have the same power as the original, but if we're smart about how we tune it, it can still perform at a high level." The stress tests had been brutal. Week after week, Dr. Walsh pushed Eli's cardiovascular system to its limits on treadmills and exercise bikes while monitoring every aspect of his cardiac function. His heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation were tracked with scientific precision, building a database of information that would determine whether he could safely return to professional competition. The psychological rehabilitation had been even more challenging than the physical recovery. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, the sports psychologist the medical team had recommended, helped Eli process the trauma of his accident and develop mental strategies for dealing with the fear that haunted his dreams. "It's completely normal to have anxiety about getting back on a bull," Dr. Rodriguez had told him during one of their sessions. "What you experienced was literally a near-death experience. Your brain is going to try to protect you from repeating that trauma." But as the weeks passed and his strength returned, Eli found that his fear was being replaced by something more powerful, a burning need to prove that red smoke hadn't beaten him. The accident had taken away his innocence about the risks of bull riding, but it had also given him something more valuable: the knowledge that he could face death and choose to keep fighting. Jake Henderson had been skeptical when Eli first approached him about using his practice facility for comeback training. The veteran rider had seen too many cowboys return from serious injuries before they were truly ready, only to suffer even worse damage when their bodies couldn't handle the stress of competition. "Kid, I've got to ask you something, and I want you to think real hard before you answer," Jake had said. "Why is this so important to you? You nearly died. You've got a chance to walk away and live a normal life. Why risk it all again?" The question had forced Eli to examine his own motivations with brutal honesty. The easy answer was that bull riding was all he knew, all he had ever wanted to do. But the real answer was more complex and more personal. "Jake, when I was lying in that arena with my heart stopped, I wasn't thinking about dying. I was thinking about those 4 seconds I missed. Red smoke didn't beat me because he was unstoppable. He beat me because I made mistakes. I let my weight shift forward, I lost my grip, I got impatient. That's not red smoke being invincible. That's me screwing up a ride I should have made." Jake had listened quietly, recognizing the obsessive drive that characterized every successful bull rider he had ever known. The best cowboys weren't fearless, they were afraid of the right things. They feared failure more than injury, regret more than death. "All right," Jake had said finally. "But we do this right. No shortcuts, no rushing the process. You get back on a bull when your heart is ready, not when your pride is ready." The first bull Eli climbed on during his comeback training was a gentle creature named Sunday School, an aging bull whose bucking days were mostly behind him. Even that simple ride, lasting barely 6 seconds on an animal that moved more like a rocking horse than a professional bucking bull, left Eli gasping for breath and feeling like his heart might explode. "Your cardiac capacity is about 70% of what it was before the accident," Dr. Chin explained after reviewing his heart monitor data from that first practice session. That might not sound like much of a difference, but in a sport that demands peak physical performance, 30% can be the difference between making the 8-second buzzer and getting thrown. But Eli refused to be discouraged. Every day, he pushed himself a little harder, rode a little longer, climbed on bulls that were a little more challenging. His technique, refined through months of analysis and practice, became more efficient and economical. He learned to conserve energy, to work with the bull's movement instead of fighting it, to make every motion count. The transformation was remarkable to watch. Jake Henderson had been around professional rodeo for 15 years, But he had never seen anyone approach bull riding with the scientific precision that Eli brought to his comeback training. "Most riders just climb on and hope for the best," Jake observed. "But you're treating every aspect of this like it's life and death." "Because it is life and death," Eli replied simply. Dr. Walsh monitored his progress through weekly stress tests and cardiac evaluations. The data showed steady improvement in his cardiovascular function, but more importantly, it showed that his heart rhythm remained stable even under extreme physical stress. "Your heart muscle has adapted remarkably well to the damage," she told him after reviewing his latest test results. "The scar tissue has integrated into the muscle wall without significantly affecting electrical conduction. From a purely medical standpoint, your heart is handling stress better than I expected. So I can compete? Your heart can handle the physical stress of bull riding. Whether you should compete is still a different question entirely." The question of medical clearance became academic when the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo extended an invitation for Eli to compete in their upcoming event. The offer came with several conditions: comprehensive medical monitoring, a cardiologist on site, and the understanding that the event would be stopped immediately if any concerns arose about his condition. More importantly, the rough stock contractor for the San Antonio Rodeo was Jim Morrison, which meant Red Smoke would be among the bulls available for the competition. The possibility of a rematch began generating media attention from sports outlets across the country. The comeback story of the year, ESPN called it in a feature segment about Eli's recovery. The young cowboy who died in the arena and lived to ride again. But for Eli, the media attention was secondary to the personal challenge he faced. Red Smoke had become more than just a bull in his mind. He had become a symbol of everything Eli needed to prove about himself. Maria Torres had watched her son's obsessive preparation with growing dread. The young man who had left the hospital 3 months ago, grateful to be alive and seemingly content with a quiet recovery, had been replaced by someone driven by an almost desperate need to return to the arena. "Mijo, you're scaring me," she told him one evening as they sat on the back porch of their San Antonio home. "This isn't about bull riding anymore. This is about something else, something that's eating you up inside." Eli looked at his mother, seeing the worry and fear that had been her constant companions since the night of his accident. He understood her concern, but he also knew that some things couldn't be explained, only experienced. "Mama, when I was unconscious in the hospital, I had dreams. Not regular dreams, but something different. I was back on Red Smoke, but this time I knew exactly what he was going to do. I could feel his power, anticipate his moves, ride him the way I should have ridden him the first time." Maria Torres felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to her son describe experiences that sounded more like visions than dreams. "Those weren't dreams, Mijo. Those were your brain trying to process trauma. You can't base your future on something that happened while you were unconscious." But Eli had already made his decision. The entry forms for the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo were sitting on his desk, already filled out and ready to be submitted. All that remained was his signature and the final medical clearance from Dr. Walsh. The comprehensive cardiac stress test that would determine his fitness for competition was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Walsh had designed a protocol that would push Eli's heart to its absolute limits while monitoring every aspect of his cardiac function. If his heart could handle the simulated stress of bull riding under controlled conditions, she would have the data needed to make an informed decision about clearing him for actual competition. "We're going to push you until your body tells us to stop," Dr. Walsh explained as technicians attached the network of sensors and electrodes that would monitor his heart throughout the test. "I want you to tell me immediately if you feel any chest pain, shortness of breath, dizziness, or irregular heartbeats." The test began on a treadmill at a walking pace, with the speed and incline gradually increasing until Eli was running uphill at a pace that would have been challenging even before his accident. His heart rate climbed steadily as the exercise intensity increased, and the monitors showed detailed information about his cardiac rhythm and function under stress. At 10 minutes, Eli's heart rate reached 170 beats per minute, and sweat was pouring down his face despite the cool temperature in the testing lab. But the monitors showed his heart rhythm remained strong and regular, with no signs of the dangerous arrhythmias that Dr. Walsh had been watching for. "How do you feel?" she called out over the noise of the treadmill. "Like I'm about to die," Eli gasped, "but my heart feels strong." At 12 minutes, they reached the target heart rate that simulated the cardiovascular demands of an 8-second bull ride. Eli's entire body was shaking from exertion, but the monitors continued to show stable cardiac function even under extreme stress. At 15 minutes, Dr. Walsh called for the test to stop. Eli collapsed into a nearby chair, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath, but his heart continued beating with steady, strong rhythm. Dr. Walsh studied the data with a mixture of amazement and concern. The numbers were better than she had dared hope for, showing that Eli's heart could indeed handle the physical demands of professional bull riding. But approving his return to competition would mean accepting responsibility for what happened if his luck ran out a second time. "Your heart function under stress is remarkable," she told him as he recovered from the test. "The damaged muscle has compensated better than any textbook case I've ever seen. From a purely medical standpoint, your cardiovascular system can handle the demands of bull riding. So I'm cleared." Dr. Walsh looked at the young man who had become one of her most challenging and inspiring patients. 3 months ago, she had watched his heart stop beating on an operating table. Now she was being asked to approve his return to the very activity that had nearly killed him. "Against my better judgment as a doctor, but based on the evidence we've gathered, yes. You're medically cleared for competition." The words hit Eli like electricity. For the first time since red smoke had thrown him, he felt like himself again. Not a patient or a victim, but a professional bull rider ready to face whatever challenge awaited him in the arena. That evening, he signed the entry forms for the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo and mailed them the next day. Word spread quickly through the rodeo community that Eli Torres was making his official comeback, and the media attention intensified. But for Eli, sitting on his back porch and watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, the media attention was irrelevant. Somewhere out there, red smoke was grazing in Jim Morrison's pasture, completely unaware that the young man he had nearly killed was coming back for a rematch. The San Antonio Rodeo was 6 weeks away, giving Eli time to fine-tune his preparation and complete his return to competitive form. Every day brought new challenges and small victories as his body adapted to the demands he was placing on it. Jake Henderson had arranged for him to practice on increasingly difficult bulls, building up to animals that approached the caliber of red smoke. Each ride was monitored by Dr. Chun, who tracked his heart rate, recovery time, and overall cardiovascular response to the stress of competition. "You're not just getting back to where you were before the accident," Jake observed after watching Eli ride a particularly challenging bull named Thunder Mountain. "You're getting better. Your technique is more refined, your timing is better, your understanding of bull behavior is deeper." The observation was accurate. Eli's near-death experience had changed his approach to bull riding in fundamental ways. He no longer relied solely on athleticism and courage. He had developed a more cerebral approach to the sport that emphasized strategy, preparation, and mental discipline. 2 weeks before the San Antonio Rodeo, Jim Morrison called with news that would define the entire event. "Son, I wanted you to hear this from me first," Morrison said. "Red Smoke is entered in the San Antonio Rodeo. If the draw works out right, there's a good chance you two might meet again." Eli felt his heart rate increase, but not from fear, from anticipation. The possibility of facing Red Smoke again had been the driving force behind his entire comeback. Now that possibility was becoming reality. "Mr. Morrison, I hope the draw does work out that way. I've got some unfinished business with that bull." The conversation was brief, but its implications were enormous. The sports media began promoting the potential rematch as the most anticipated event in rodeo history. The ultimate test of whether a man could overcome the animal that had literally killed him. For Eli Torres, the anticipation was both thrilling and terrifying. In just 2 weeks, he would find out if his damaged heart was strong enough to carry him through 8 seconds that would define the rest of his life. Red Smoke was waiting, somewhere in the Texas Hill Country, completely unaware that the young man he had thrown was coming back for redemption. The Alamodome in San Antonio had never felt this electric. 45,000 spectators packed every seat, their collective energy creating a wall of sound that seemed to make the massive structure vibrate. Outside in the parking lots, news vans from every major sports network had set up broadcast positions, while satellite trucks beamed the story of Eli Torres's comeback attempt to audiences around the world. This wasn't just a rodeo anymore. It had become something approaching a cultural phenomenon. The young cowboy who had died and come back to life was attempting to ride the bull that had killed him, and the entire sports world was watching. Eli Torres sat in the contestant area beneath the arena, staring at the cardiac monitor strapped to his chest underneath his protective vest. The device would transmit his heart rate, rhythm, and other vital signs in real time to Dr. Walsh, who was stationed in a medical command center with a full resuscitation team standing by. "How you feeling, kid?" Jake Henderson asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Like I'm about to find out if the last 4 months of my life have been worth it," Eli replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to attempt. The draw for the evening's bull riding competition had been announced an hour earlier, and fate had delivered exactly what everyone had hoped for and feared. Eli Torres would be riding Red Smoke in the final section of competition. The matchup had been promoted as Redemption versus Revenge, though both descriptions seemed inadequate for what was really happening. In the VIP section above the arena, Maria Torres sat surrounded by family members, friends, and complete strangers who had been drawn to witness what might be the most emotionally charged 8 seconds in rodeo history. She wore the same rosary her mother had given her 50 years ago, each bead worn smooth by decades of desperate prayers. "I can't watch," she told her eldest son Carlos. "I keep seeing him lying in that dirt, not breathing. What if it happens again?" Carlos put his arm around his mother, understanding her terror, but also recognizing something that had changed in his youngest brother over the past months. "Mama, Eli isn't the same person who got on Red Smoke 4 months ago. He's stronger now, smarter, more prepared. If anyone can do this, it's him." Down in the medical command center, Dr. Walsh monitored the wireless signal from Eli's cardiac sensors. His resting heart rate was elevated but stable at 95 beats per minute, higher than normal, but understandable given the circumstances. More importantly, his heart rhythm showed no signs of the dangerous irregularities that could indicate impending cardiac problems. "All systems are green," she reported to the event medical coordinator. "But I want everyone to understand, if I see anything concerning on his monitors, we stop this immediately. I don't care if he's in the middle of the ride." The early bulls of the evening provided spectacular entertainment, but everyone knew they were preliminaries to the main event. Cowboys from across the professional circuit had come to San Antonio not just to compete, but to witness Eli's attempt at redemption. Some of them had visited him in the hospital, others had followed his recovery through social media, but all of them understood the significance of what was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the sound system as the evening's competition moved toward its climax. "What you are about to witness is unprecedented in the history of professional rodeo. 4 months ago, Eli Torres died in an arena in Waco, Texas, after being thrown by tonight's final bull. His heart stopped beating for 4.5 minutes. Now he's back for a rematch that will define both his career and his life." The crowd erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the Alamodome. 45,000 people rose to their feet, creating a thunderous ovation for a young man whose story had transcended sports to become something approaching legend. In the contestant area, Eli stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him like a shroud. Every step toward the bucking chutes felt both inevitable and impossible, as if he were walking through a dream that might shatter at any moment. Red Smoke was already loaded in chute number 8, his massive frame barely contained by the metal structure. The bull stood calmly, occasionally shifting his weight, but showing no signs of recognition for the young man who was approaching. To Red Smoke, this was just another ride, another 8 seconds of doing what 15 years of breeding and training had designed him to do. Jim Morrison stood beside the chute as Eli approached, his weathered face showing the strain of the past months. The old rancher had been breeding bucking bulls for 30 years, but he had never been involved in anything with stakes this high. "Son, I want you to know that bull's been different since your accident," Morrison said quietly. "It's like he knows something happened, like he's been waiting for you to come back." Eli climbed onto the chute rails and looked down at Red Smoke, studying the animal that had changed his life forever. The bull was even more impressive than he remembered, over a ton of perfectly conditioned muscle and bone, with the intelligent eyes of an animal that had never been successfully ridden in over 50 attempts. "Hello, Red," Eli whispered. "Let's finish what we started." The process of getting settled on the bull was both familiar and terrifying. Eli's bull rope had been specially designed by the equipment specialists at the Professional Bull Riders Association, using materials and techniques that hadn't existed 4 months ago. His protective vest contained impact sensors that would immediately alert medical personnel if he took a dangerous hit. His helmet was equipped with communication devices that would allow Dr. Walsh to monitor his vital signs throughout the ride. Jake Henderson helped him adjust his grip, checking and rechecking every detail of his equipment and position. "Remember everything we practiced," he said. "This bull is going to explode out of that chute with more power than you've ever felt. Don't try to muscle him. Let him make the first move, then counter. Your technique is perfect now, just trust your training." Dr. Walsh's voice crackled through the radio system. "Heart rate is 145 and climbing. Rhythm is regular. All vitals are within acceptable parameters." The arena fell completely silent as Eli settled into his final position on Red Smoke's back. 45,000 people held their collective breath, knowing they were about to witness something that would be remembered for generations. "You ready, son?" asked the chute boss. Eli adjusted his grip one final time, feeling the familiar texture of the bull rope against his palm. His heart was beating fast but strong, pumping blood through arteries and veins that had been repaired, strengthened, and tested beyond normal human limits. For just a moment, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. The accident, the death, the resurrection, the months of rehabilitation and preparation. Everything in his life had led to these next 8 seconds. "I'm ready," he said. The chute gate swung open. Red smoke exploded into the arena with the same devastating power that had nearly killed Eli Torres 4 months earlier. But this time everything was different. This time, Eli was ready for the bull's first move. A massive leap to the left followed by a spinning kick designed to launch him into the arena dirt. Instead of fighting the bull's momentum, Eli moved with Red Smoke, using the animal's own power to maintain his balance and position. His grip was secure, his weight perfectly centered, his technique flawless. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Red Smoke attempted his signature move, dropping his head low and whipping forward in an attempt to send Eli flying over his horns. But Eli had studied hours of video footage of this exact maneuver, and he countered it perfectly, keeping his upper body in position while absorbing the bull's energy through his legs. 4 seconds. 5 seconds. The crowd was on its feet, screaming with excitement as they watched a masterpiece of athletic competition unfold before their eyes. This wasn't the desperate struggle of Eli's first ride on Red Smoke. This was a chess match between 2 perfectly matched opponents, each testing the other's limits. 6 seconds. 7 seconds. Red Smoke made his final desperate attempt to dislodge his rider, launching into a series of spinning, twisting jumps that would have thrown any other cowboy in the arena. But Eli Torres was no longer the rider he had been 4 months ago. He was something new, a combination of natural talent, scientific preparation, and the kind of mental toughness that comes from literally dying and choosing to live again. 8 seconds. The buzzer sounded, and the Alamodome exploded in a roar unlike anything in its history. Eli dismounted cleanly, landing on his feet in the arena dirt with his arms raised in triumph. Red Smoke, his job complete, trotted toward the exit gate with what almost seemed like acknowledgement that he had been beaten by the better man. Dr. Walsh's voice cut through the celebration. Peak heart rate 182. Rhythm stayed regular throughout the entire ride. All vitals perfect. Eli fell to his knees in the arena dirt, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. The young man who had died in this very arena 4 months ago had returned to defeat the bull that killed him. But more than that, he had proven that some things, courage, determination, the refusal to surrender to fear, were stronger than death itself. Jake Henderson was the first to reach him, grabbing him in a bear hug that lifted him off the ground. "You magnificent bastard, you actually did it. You rode him perfectly." The judges announced the score moments later. 94.5 points, the highest score in San Antonio rodeo history. But for Eli Torres, the numbers were meaningless. He had already won everything that mattered to him. As he walked toward the exit gate, waving to the crowd that was still on its feet applauding, Red Smoke was being loaded into his trailer for the trip back to Jim Morrison's ranch. The bull paused at the trailer ramp and looked back at the young man who had just accomplished what no other rider had ever managed. There was something different in Red Smoke's expression, not defeat but respect. The bull had given everything he had, and for the first time in his career, it hadn't been enough. The student had become the master. In the grandstand, Maria Torres was crying tears of joy, relief, and pure maternal pride. Her youngest son had faced his demons and won. The boy who had died in the arena dirt had been reborn as a man who understood that some dreams were worth risking everything to achieve. The media interviews lasted for over 2 hours, but finally Eli was able to return to the contestant area where his family was waiting. His brothers lifted him onto their shoulders, carrying him around the locker room while other cowboys cheered and applauded. "So what's next?" Carlos asked as they finally settled down. "You've proven you can beat Red Smoke. What else is there to accomplish?" Eli looked around at the faces of his family, his friends, and his fellow competitors. 4 months ago, he had been a promising young rider with something to prove. Tonight, he was something entirely different. A man who had faced the ultimate test and emerged victorious. "I don't know what's next," he said honestly. "Maybe I'll keep competing, maybe I'll help other riders who have been hurt, maybe I'll just go home and help Mom in the garden. But whatever I do, I'll know that I didn't let fear make the choice for me." Dr. Walsh appeared beside them, still holding the tablet that had monitored his cardiac function throughout the ride. "Eli, what you just accomplished was medically extraordinary. Your heart performed flawlessly under extreme stress. The repair and rehabilitation work has exceeded every projection we made. So I'm cleared for full competition?" She smiled, the first time he had seen her truly relaxed since his accident. "Son, after what I just witnessed, I think you're cleared for anything life can throw at you." As the crowds filed out of the Alamodome and the lights began to dim, Eli Torres stood alone in the arena where he had died and been reborn. The dirt beneath his boots was the same dirt that had been stained with his blood 4 months ago, but tonight it felt like hallowed ground, a place where the impossible had become reality. Red Smoke was already miles away, heading back to his pasture where he would rest and prepare for his next challenge. The bull had lost tonight, but there was no shame in losing to perfection. He had done his job with honor and power, and that was enough. Eli picked up a handful of arena dirt and let it run through his fingers, feeling the weight of what he had accomplished. Tomorrow there would be decisions to make about his future, interviews to give, and life to live. But tonight he was content to stand in this place where he had learned the most important lesson of his life. That sometimes the only way to truly conquer your fears is to ride them for 8 perfect seconds. As he walked toward the exit, his phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Henderson. "Kid, I've been around rodeo for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You didn't just beat Red Smoke tonight. You became the rider you were destined to be. The heart attack didn't end your career. It was the beginning of something greater." Eli smiled and put his phone away. Outside the arena, his family was waiting to celebrate, and somewhere in the distance, another young cowboy was dreaming about his own 8 seconds of glory. The circle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. But tonight belonged to Eli Torres, the young man who had died and chosen to live again, who had faced his greatest fear and found redemption in the most unlikely place imaginable. On the back of the bull that had stopped his heart,